You've been scrolling through dinner reservations for 20 minutes, and with each price you see, there's a small calculation happening in the background, not just about whether you can afford it, about whether this specific gesture on this specific day carries enough weight to justify what it costs, about whether the person across from you will measure your love by the price of the evening, about whether you're doing this right. And then there's this other feeling, quieter but more persistent, the sense that everyone else seems to navigate this day with ease, that for them, Valentine's Day is simple, a romantic expression, cultural ritual, something light, but for you, it's tangled up with something heavy, something that has less to do with romance and more to do with a question you can't quite shake. What does it mean about me if I can't make this feel effortless? People might call this overthinking or being practical or even unromantic, but those labels miss what's actually happening beneath the surface. They flatten a complex emotional response into a character flaw when the truth is far more layered than that. What we're really looking at is the psychology of people who stress about money on Valentine's Day. And this isn't about being cheap or anxious or incapable of romance. It's about the way certain nervous systems experience obligation, expectation, and worth, and how a single commercialized holiday can activate all three at once in a way that feels impossible to untangle. Here's what most people don't understand. The stress isn't really about the money. It's about what the money represents. And that representation was built long before you ever had to choose between the prefix menu and something more modest. Neuroscience research on decision-making under social pressure reveals that our brains process financial choices very differently when they're tied to relational evaluation. The medial prefrontal cortex, which helps us assess social standing and acceptance, lights up alongside the regions associated with loss aversion. In practical terms, this means that spending money on Valentine's Day isn't experienced as a simple transaction. It's experienced as a test, one where the stakes feel disproportionately high because what's being measured isn't just generosity, it's adequacy. For some people, this test was introduced early. Maybe you grew up in a home where love was demonstrated through material provision, where affection and expenditure were quietly synonymous. Or maybe the opposite, where money was so scarce that any spending felt reckless, indulgent, a betrayal of survival. Either way, you learned that money isn't neutral. It's language, it's proof. And on a day that's explicitly designed to measure romantic devotion through consumption, that old wiring gets reactivated. There's another pathway too. Maybe you've been in relationships where your financial limitations were used as evidence of inadequacy, where a partner made you feel small for not being able to provide the experience they expected. Or maybe you've internalized the broader cultural message that romance requires a certain aesthetic, the flowers, the reservation, the thoughtful gift, and that without those markers, what you're offering isn't enough. What happens in those environments is that your nervous system starts treating Valentine's Day not as an opportunity for connection, but as a referendum on your. The stress you feel isn't irrational. It's your brain detecting a situation where failure has consequence, where not meeting an invisible standard could mean rejection, disappointment, or confirmation of fear you've carried for years that you are fundamentally not enough. And here's the thing, this response isn't worse than the person who glides through Valentine's Day without a second thought. It's not a deficit. It's just a different calibration shaped by different experiences. Some people learned that love is unconditional and that gestures are symbolic, not transactional. You learned that love often comes with terms, that care must be earned, that the way you show up on the days that matter is how you prove you deserve to stay. Neither lesson is more correct. They're just different maps of the same territory. And the map you're holding makes Valentine's Day feel like navigating a minefield because every choice is weighted with meaning you didn't ask to carry. But there's a paradox here that's worth sitting with. The very stress that makes Valentine's Day feel so heavy is often what makes you an incredibly thoughtful part the rest of the year. You notice things. You remember detail. You put care into the everyday moments that don't come with cultural scripts or price tags. Because for you, love isn't confined to a single day. It's woven into the smaller, quieter gestures that other people overlook. The problem is that Valentine's Day doesn't reward that kind of love. It rewards performance. It rewards the grand gesture, the visible display, the thing that can be photographed and posted and compared. And if your way of loving doesn't fit that template, the day can start to feel like a referendum on whether your love. There's also this. The stress about money on Valentine's Day often isn't just about impressing your partner. It's about protecting yourself from shame, from the imagined judge of the server who might notice didn't order wine, from the internal voice that compares your evening to the highlight reel you saw on, from quiet fear that your partner will tell the story of this Valentine's Day someday and the story will be disappointing. That kind of anticipatory shame is exhausting, and it's compounded by the fact that you can't always tell how much of it is real and how much is projection. Maybe your partner doesn't care about the prefix menu. Maybe they'd be just as happy with a walk and takeout, but because because you've learned that love is measured by effort, and effort is often measured by expense, you can't quite trust that simplicity is enough. What makes this even more complicated is that the stress itself can become a source of guilt. You might think, why can't I just relax? Why does this day have to be so fraught? Other people seem to enjoy it. What's wrong with me? But that's the trap. The stress isn't a personal failing. It's a nervous system response to a culturally manufactured situation that's designed to make people feel inadequate if they don't participate in a specific way. And your system is just more sensitive to that design because of what it learned to watch for. Here's something else that often goes unnoticed. People who stress about money on Valentine's Day are frequently the same people who are hyper-conscious of reciprocity in relationships. You track what you give and what you receive, not because you're keeping score, but because balance feels like safety. If you're giving enough, you can't be accused of taking. If you're meeting expectations, you can't be abandoned for falling short. But Valentine's Day disrupts that balance because the expectations are often unclear and the stakes feel artificially high. You don't know if what you're planning is enough. You don't know if your partner secretly wanted something different. And because there's no objective standard, only the vague cultural pressure to make the day special, you're left guessing. And for a nervous system that craves clarity, that ambiguity is its own kind of stress. There's a hidden strength in this, though. The sensitivity that makes Valentine's Day difficult is the same sensitivity that makes you attuned to your partner's needs the other 364 days of the year. You notice when they're struggling. You remember what matters to them. You show up in ways that don't come with a manual because you've learned to read the subtleties that others miss. Valentine's Day just happens to be the one day where that attunement doesn't translate well, because the day itself is less about authentic connection and more about performing connection in a way that's socially recognizable. And if you're someone who values substance over performance, the whole thing can feel hollow, not because you don't care about romance, but because the version of romance being sold doesn't match the version you actually live. The quiet cost of all this is that you can spend so much energy managing the stress of the day that you lose access to the thing the day is supposedly about: connection. You're so focused on getting it right that you can't be present, so worried about whether you're enough that you forget to notice whether you're actually enjoying yourself. And afterward, even if everything went well, there's often this residual exhaustion, not from the evening itself, but from the emotional labor of trying to meet a standard that was never clearly defined. But here's what that also means. Your stress is not a sign that you're broken or incapable of love. It's a sign that you care deeply about being perceived as caring, that you've internalized the idea that love requires proof, and that proof costs something. And while that belief might make Valentine's Day harder, it also means you're someone who doesn't take relationships for granted, who understands that connection requires effort, who shows up even when it's uncomfortable. That matters, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment, even if the day itself feels like something you have to survive rather than enjoy. If this resonates, you're not alone in caring. There are other days, other expectations, other quiet pressure that probably land in similar way. And understanding why they land the way they do doesn't make them disappear, but it does shift how you hold. You start to see that the stress isn't evidence of inadequacy. It's evidence of a system that learned to equate love with performance and worth with meeting expectations. There's more underneath this. Other patterns you probably lived with for so long, you don't even see them as patterns any. If you're curious, there's more to uncover. Stay close.